Within the realm of dark, eerie and atmospheric horror games, we have to pay homage to the name or the series that originally started it all, and that would be Alone in the Dark. Starting all the way back in 1992, the series would go through somewhat of a transition over the years before laying dormant entirely, but there is an upcoming remake that is in the works that will be due to be released very soon as of recording this video. But back in 2001, the series would go through the first of many reboots with the new Nightmare that saw a release on the PlayStation 2, Windows PC, Sega Dreamcast and Nintendo Game Boy Color. The Game Boy Color version in itself was quite an incredible achievement to have a game with such premise and survival horror elements taken from both the iconic elements seen in previous games, also similar to seen in the Resident Evil games, to make it playable on a handheld console was a feat in itself and was considered impossible, but it was achieved. So with the new Nightmare, the game is set in the modern time of the year 2001, reprising the role of Edward Carnby from the original series of games, finding out that his best friend, Charles Fisk, has been murdered off the coast of Shadow Island, a mysterious island that hides a dark and hidden past. So it is up to Carnby, alongside of a young professor known as Aline Cedric, to track down various people on the island to gain information, but to also to uncover the secrets and the reasons behind Carnby's friend's murder. But what takes place is something that they hadn't seen or prepared for, with unearthing many hidden elements, secrets, while encountering many dark monsters and other grotesque creatures that can appear out of nowhere and literally hide in the shadows. And the only way to keep them at bay or to destroy them entirely is to use a variety of weapons or to use light to stop them from destroying you entirely. And with this version of the game, it still stays to the tried and tested gameplay elements seen in the likes of earlier games that came before it, way back in the early 90s, that were also made popular with the Resident Evil series on the PlayStation 1, with the fixed camera angles and pre-rendered backgrounds. But unlike the Resident Evil games, while they were dark, gritty, atmospheric and gory, Alone in the Dark, the new Nightmare, definitely takes it up a notch, as the environments are very gothic-like, because again the setting is in an unknown island. The darker elements of the environments make for a very surreal experience, as you're in complete darkness running around in shadow type environments, and the enemies hide in the shadows as they don't allow themselves to go into the light, as the light is their weakness. So that's where you need to take advantage of in order to defeat them and unlock various new areas to explore, while also uncovering items of interest that can help you to progress throughout the campaign. The game was well received in magazines, with the PlayStation and Dreamcast versions especially receiving favourable reviews. The PlayStation 2 version did receive decent reviews, but not as well received compared to the other versions, but it did have better visuals, as it was technically the same game in all respects to it. So as you traverse through the dark and dimly lit corridors of the mansion, its outside surroundings and even the many underground caverns and tunnels that you will explore, you will uncover loads of items and elements and a variety of different types of weapons that are quite quirky and yet unique to the game itself, but they will be essential in order to survive the onslaught of the enemies that will constantly pursue you in the darkness. And with the pre-rendered backdrops that were made popular with Resident Evil style games, it only adds to heighten the atmosphere and tension as you play, as the game is very gritty, and even the soundtrack also plays a pivotal role in unearthing a lot of tension that you will notice as you play. You will always be on edge throughout the experience. Even at the time of this game's release, when we look at the backdrop of the history of this type of survival horror game, while there were many other titles that had come and gone before it, at the time when this was released, that style of game was in many cases being seen as somewhat overused, as a lot of people didn't like the tank based controls and were looking for something new, and this in turn would lead to the series going dormant until another remake in 2008 that had more of a cinematic or movie style feel, but would remove completely all of the elements seen from earlier games to make it an entirely different experience, but at the same time was very buggy and glitchy, and it didn't receive as good a reviews, as it just felt unpolished in many ways. But it did have some really good ideas, and it was very dark and gritty, but just wasn't executed as well. So when we look in the grand scheme of things, up until this point, Alone in the Dark, The New Nightmare is quite possibly considered the best game in the entire franchise in terms of its polish and final portrayal of the horror elements that you would see in the series. As yes, the earlier games that had come before it did develop these traits, but the control systems hadn't evolved to a point where they were flexible to make it easy for people to get involved with. It wouldn't be until the PlayStation where these control methods would become prominent, and this game would definitely make full use of that. So whichever version of this game that you play, just know that you're going to have a good experience. It is one of the best survival horror games on the PlayStation 2, or pretty much any platform that you'll play on, and it is worthwhile experience just to explore the series in general. So I would love to know your thoughts of Alone in the Dark, The New Nightmare for the PlayStation 2, or if you've played it on the PS1, if you've played it on the Sega Dreamcast, Windows PC, or even on the Game Boy Color, because I've played it on pretty much all of the platforms and they're all very, very good. Even looking back, my brother had the Nintendo Game Boy version and I was completely surprised by how good it actually was. The fact that even on a handheld 8-bit console that it still managed to portray the pre-rendered backgrounds in an 8-bit format was quite incredible, and it was one of the very few games to ever achieve that, and the fact is that it got published was even more of a treat. So whichever version of the game that you play, while it's not the most perfect survival horror game out there, it definitely helped to pave the way for a lot of future entries in the genre itself. And the fact is that not only was it the original series that started the survival horror genre in itself, it did also take a lot of inspiration from its future successors, with the likes of Resident Evil and even Dino Crisis, to name but a few. But this version of the game is still another good entry to add to your list of games to play if you're a fan of that type of genre specific game. So I'd love to hear whatever thoughts you do have of Alone in the Dark, The New Nightmare, so be sure to share it down in the comments below. And if you would like to see more content around other types of survival horror games also released on the PlayStation, then you can check out this playlist of videos here on screen to see more of those games in action, so that you can understand the roots and the scary nature behind what made them so terrifying. And I will see you all in the next one.
Did you hear something?